Every time I went to my friend's house, his mother looked at me like she was hiding something. And the night she finally whispered, "I've been watching you for weeks," everything between us changed. The rain had started just before sunset, the kind that turned the streets silver beneath the glow of traffic lights. By the time I pulled into my friend Jason's driveway, water drummed steadily against my windshield, soft but relentless. I grabbed the bag of takeout from the passenger seat, pulled my hoodie tighter around my neck, and hurried toward the front door through the cold mist. I'd been to this house more times than I could count. Movie nights, study sessions, random weekends when neither of us had anything better to do. It always felt familiar, safe. But that night, something felt different before I even understood why. Jason yelled for me to come in from upstairs the second I stepped through the door. I kicked off my wet shoes near the entrance and shook rainwater from my sleeves. "Kitchen," his mother called out warmly before I could answer him. Her voice always had this calmness to it, soft, steady, the kind that made you feel welcome immediately. I walked into the kitchen carrying the food, and for a second I just stood there quietly. The room glowed with warm yellow light, dim enough to feel cozy against the storm outside. A kettle hissed gently on the stove, while low jazz music drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. And then there was her. She stood near the counter in a cream-colored sweater with the sleeves pushed casually to her forearms, reading glasses resting low on her nose while she flipped through a cookbook she probably wasn't even reading anymore. Her dark hair was loosely pinned up, though a few strands had fallen near her cheek. Simple, elegant, effortlessly beautiful in a way that didn't feel forced. "You're soaked," she said with a small laugh, finally looking up at me. I smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, your son picked the worst possible weather for takeout. He usually does." There was something easy about talking to her. No games, no trying too hard. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which honestly felt rare. While Jason stayed upstairs yelling at his headset, she poured tea into 2 mugs and leaned lightly against the counter across from me. The kitchen smelled faintly like cinnamon and vanilla. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. "You look tired," she said gently after a moment. I shrugged. "Long week. Work. And life, I guess." She gave me this understanding look that lingered longer than it probably should have. Not pity, recognition, like she understood exhaustion better than most people. When the kettle started whistling again, she stepped beside me to reach for it. Her arm brushed lightly against mine first. Then her fingertips slid briefly across the back of my hand as she grabbed the handle. It was accidental. At least I told myself it was. But the warmth of her touch stayed there longer than it should have. I looked down instinctively while she poured the water, pretending not to notice how suddenly aware I'd become of how close she was standing. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," I answered too quickly. She smiled faintly, like maybe she noticed anyway. A few minutes later, Jason finally thundered downstairs, grabbing food and immediately launching into some story about work drama. Everything should have gone back to normal after that. But it didn't, because sometime during that quiet conversation in the kitchen, I'd started seeing her differently. And once that happened, I couldn't seem to stop. After that night, I started noticing things I probably should have ignored. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless. Jason and I still hung out like always. Nothing about the routine changed. I'd come over after work, we'd order food, play games, waste hours talking about nothing important. But slowly, almost invisibly, his mother started becoming the part of those evenings I looked forward to most. It happened in little moments, the kind you could easily explain away if you tried hard enough. A week after the storm, I showed up late one evening and found her alone in the kitchen again, standing near the coffee machine with reading glasses perched on her nose. Without even asking, she slid a mug across the counter toward me. "1 sugar, little bit of cream," she said casually. I stopped halfway through taking off my jacket. "You remembered." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "You always make the same face after the first sip if there's too much sugar." I laughed quietly, but something about that stayed with me. She noticed things, small things, the kind most people forgot immediately. After that, I started catching myself looking for her whenever I walked into the house. Sometimes she'd be folding laundry in the living room while some old movie played softly in the background. Other times she'd sit at the kitchen island with a cup of tea, asking how work was going while Jason disappeared upstairs for 20 minutes at a time. And somehow, those 20 minutes always turned into conversations that felt strangely personal. Easy. Real. You look less stressed lately, she told me one evening while drying dishes beside me. You can tell. You carry stress in your shoulders, she said. When life gets heavy, it tense up before anything else. I blinks her. That's weirdly specific. She laughed softly. Mothers notice things. But the way she said it made my chest tighten slightly. Because it didn't feel motherly. Not exactly. One cold Friday night, I arrived drenched from another unexpected downpour. Jason was upstairs on a work call, leaving me alone downstairs while I tried drying rainwater from my jacket. You're hopeless, she teased gently from behind me. I turned just as she stepped closer. Before I could react, her hands lifted to the collar of my jacket, smoothing it down carefully. The gesture was simple, normal even, but standing that close to her suddenly felt dangerous. I could smell her perfume faintly, something warm and soft, mixed with the scent of fresh laundry. Her fingers lingered near my shoulder for one extra second before she looked up at me. And that pause, that tiny silent pause, it changed something. Neither of us moved immediately. The rain hummed against the windows behind us while the rest of the house stayed quiet. You should dry your hair before you get sick, she said finally, though her voice had softened. Right? I muttered, barely managing the word. She stepped back slowly, but I could still feel the warmth of her hands through the fabric of my jacket. That night messed with my head more than I wanted to admit. Driving home, I kept replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few weeks. The way her eyes lingered sometimes. How she remembered details I barely remembered telling her. How her smile changed whenever we were alone. I tried convincing myself I was imagining all of it, because the alternative felt impossible. She was my friend's mother. Beautiful, confident, mature in ways I wasn't used to. And somehow that only made it worse. Then, just before I got into my car that night, she leaned lightly against the doorway and said something that stayed with me long after I left. You notice more than most people do. Her voice was quiet, almost thoughtful, and the look she gave me afterward made the drive home feel a whole lot longer than usual. A few days later, I stopped by Jason's house to return a charger I'd borrowed. It was late, later than I normally came over. The neighborhood was quiet except for the low rumble of thunder rolling somewhere in the distance. Rain clouds had swallowed most of the evening sky, leaving the streets washed in pale gray light. I figured I'd hand Jason the charger, stay 5 minutes, then leave. But when the front door opened, it wasn't him standing there. It was her. She looked mildly surprised to see me at first, though it quickly softened into a warm smile. Hey, she said gently. Jason's not home yet. Oh, I lifted the charger awkwardly. I was just dropping this off. Another distant crack of thunder echoed outside. Then the lights flickered once. She glanced toward the window before looking back at me. You can wait inside until the storm settles a little. I hesitated. I probably should have said no, but I stepped inside anyway. The house felt different that night. Quieter. The overhead lights stayed off except for a single lamp glowing softly in the living room, casting warm amber light across the hardwood floors. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while thunder rolled low and heavy in the distance. For some reason, everything felt more intimate in the dim lighting, more honest. She disappeared briefly into the kitchen before returning with 2 mugs of tea. Figured you could use this, she said. Thanks. We sat across from each other in the living room, steam curling slowly from our cups while the storm wrapped around the house. For a while, the conversation stayed light. Work, Jason, random stories. But eventually the pauses between sentences started lasting longer. And somehow, those quiet moments didn't feel awkward. They felt comfortable. She tucked one leg beneath herself on the couch and stared into her tea for a second before speaking again. Can I tell you something a little embarrassing? I looked up. Sure. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something quieter. Do you know what's strange about getting older? I shook my head. You slowly stop feeling noticed. The words landed softly, but there was weight behind them. She gave a small shrug, though I could tell the subject mattered more than she wanted to admit. Not invisible completely, she continued. People still need things from you. Depend on you. But after a while, she laughed faintly. You stop feeling seen as a person. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. You spend so much time being responsible for everyone else that eventually you forget what it felt like to be cared for too. The storm outside seemed louder for a moment. Or maybe the silence between us just deepened. She looked beautiful sitting there in the soft lamplight, but not in a polished or intimidating way. Real, tired in places she tried to hide. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. You don't seem invisible to me, I said quietly. Her eyes lifted toward mine slowly. That look between us lasted longer than either of us intended. And something shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to feel dangerous. She smiled then, but this time it was smaller, more emotional. You're very kind, she whispered. I shook my head lightly. I mean it. For a second, neither of us moved. Then her hand slowly rested over mine where it sat on the couch between us. Warm, gentle. Her fingers barely pressed against my skin at first, like she wasn't fully sure she should be doing it. But then her thumb brushed once against the side of my hand in the smallest, absent-minded motion imaginable. My chest tightened instantly, not because it was seductive, because it felt sincere, human. I looked down at our hands, then back at her, and I realized she looked nervous. That surprised me more than anything. After a few quiet seconds, she slowly pulled her hand away, almost reluctantly. You should probably go before this gets complicated, she said softly. The words were careful, but the way she looked at me afterward made it clear that things already were. After that night, I stayed away from the house for almost a week. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't know how to be around her anymore. Every time my phone lit up with a message from Jason asking if I wanted to come over, I stared at it too long before making some excuse. Work. Tired. Busy. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of what I'd started feeling. And judging by the look on her face before I left that night, I wasn't the only one. But avoiding someone only works until life pushes you back into the same room again. Jason invited me over the following Saturday for a playoff game. I almost declined automatically before realizing how ridiculous I was being. So I went. The rain had finally stopped after days of gray skies, leaving the evening cool and quiet. When I stepped inside the house, the familiar scent of coffee and vanilla wrapped around me instantly. And then I saw her. She stood near the dining room table, arranging flowers into a glass vase, soft golden light spilling across the room from the nearby kitchen. She looked up the second the door closed behind me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly, surprise first, then something gentler, something relieved. Hey, she said quietly. Hey. Jason barely lasted 10 minutes downstairs before one of his coworkers called him away for an emergency shift. He apologized while grabbing his keys, completely oblivious to the tension he was leaving behind. Back in an hour, he shouted before disappearing out the front door. Then the house went silent. I heard the engine of his car fade into the distance. Neither of us moved immediately. She adjusted one of the flowers unnecessarily while I pretended to check my phone. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was loaded. Every glance felt too long. Every breath felt strangely noticeable. Finally, she exhaled softly and leaned both hands against the edge of the table. I thought maybe you were avoiding me. There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty. I looked down briefly before admitting, maybe I was. Her eyes lowered for a moment, as if she'd expected that answer. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? For making things confusing. I stepped closer before I could overthink it. You didn't. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And whatever restraint had been holding the moment together suddenly felt fragile. The evening light caught the softness in her expression, the uncertainty she usually hid so well. I've been trying to figure this out in my head for weeks, she admitted softly. Trying to convince myself it was harmless. My chest tightened. She laughed faintly, nervous now. And that probably sounds ridiculous. It doesn't. Another long silence settled between us. Then finally, barely above a whisper, she said the words that had clearly been sitting inside her for far too long. I've been watching you for weeks. The air seemed to disappear from the room. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table before she continued. Trying to understand why being around you makes me feel. She paused, shaking her head once. Different. There was vulnerability in her voice now. Real vulnerability. Not flirtation. Not manipulation. Just honesty stripped completely bare. I told myself it was admiration, she whispered. That I just like talking to you, because you listen. But every time you walked through that front door, her eyes met mine again. I noticed. My heart was pounding hard enough to make me feel unsteady. Me too, I admitted quietly. The words seemed to affect her more than I expected. She stepped closer slowly, cautiously, close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume again. Warm, subtle, familiar now. Her hand lifted hesitantly before her fingers curled gently around my wrist, like she was giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I turned my hand carefully beneath hers and held it. The tension in her face softened instantly. Then, almost uncertainly, she moved into my arms. The embrace felt slow and careful, like neither of us trusted it yet. Her arms slipped around my waist while my hands settled lightly against the middle of her back. I felt her cheek rest against my chest, warm and impossibly soft. And for several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Because somehow that quiet embrace said everything words hadn't been able to. Everything changed after that hug. Not all at once. There was no dramatic confession afterward, no reckless decision to throw caution aside and pretend the situation was simple. If anything, we became more careful, more aware of every look, every pause, every second we spent near each other. And somehow, that made the feelings worse. For the next several days, I barely slept properly. I catch myself replaying the way she melted into my arms that evening. The quiet exhale against my chest, the hesitant way her fingers tightened lightly against the back of my sweater like she needed comfort just as much as I did. It wasn't lust haunting me. It was tenderness. That scared me more, because tenderness meant this was becoming real. I started avoiding Jason again without meaning to. Every invitation felt complicated now. I hated the guilt sitting in my chest every time his name appeared on my phone. He trusted me. And meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about his mother. The worst part was, I missed her. Not just the tension. Her. I missed the calm feeling that settled over me whenever we talked. The way she listened without interrupting. The softness in her voice whenever she said my name. Even stupid little things suddenly stayed with me. The smell of cinnamon tea. The sound of her quiet laugh from the kitchen. The way she brushed loose strands of hair behind her ear while thinking. One night, after almost another full week of silence between us, my phone buzzed while I was lying awake in bed. Her name appeared on the screen. Just seeing it made my pulse jump. The message was short. Jason's out with friends tonight. I just wanted to know if you're okay. I stared at the words for a long moment before replying. Yeah, just trying to think. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. So am I. That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, 20 minutes later, I found myself parked outside her house again. The lights inside were low when she opened the door. She looked nervous the second our eyes met, though she stepped aside quietly to let me in. Neither of us knew what to say at first. The house felt painfully familiar now, comfortable in a dangerous kind of way. I shouldn't have asked you to come, she admitted softly once we reached the living room. But you wanted to. Her eyes lowered. Yes. The honesty in that single word hit harder than anything else. I sat beside her on the couch, careful to leave space between us at first. The silence stretched gently while rain tapped against the windows again, softer this time. I keep thinking about him, I admitted finally. About Jason. She closed her eyes briefly like she'd been carrying the exact same thought. I know. I feel guilty. You should, she whispered, though not cruelly. I do too. That hurt to hear, because I knew she was right. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost painfully, she said, I don't want to become something you regret later. I turned toward her immediately. You won't. You can't know that. Ido. The certainty in my own voice surprised even me. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and whatever she saw there made her expression soften. I haven't felt this understood in years, she confessed quietly. Something in my chest tightened hard at those words. Without thinking, my hand moved closer across the couch cushion until my fingers lightly touched hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she slowly intertwined her fingers with mine, careful and tentative, like the gesture mattered more than either of us wanted to admit. We stayed like that for a while. No rusing, no pretending. Eventually, her head rested lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her against me felt natural now, almost frighteningly so. Outside, the rain continued falling softly against the windows while both of us sat there silently wrestling with the same impossible truth. This wasn't temporary anymore. For a while, we convinced ourselves we were being careful. Careful with the lingering looks. Careful with the quiet moments alone in the kitchen. Careful with the way her hand sometimes found mine when nobody was paying attention. But emotions have a way of becoming visible long before people admit them out loud. And eventually, Jason noticed. It happened on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. The three of us were in the living room while a basketball game played quietly on television. Jason sat sprawled across the recliner, scrolling through his phone while I helped his mother carry drinks in from the kitchen. Nothing unusual. At least that's what I thought. But as she handed me one of the glasses, our fingers brushed briefly together. A tiny moment, barely noticeable, except she looked at me afterward. And I looked back, just for a second too long. When I turned around again, Jason was watching both of us. Something in my stomach dropped immediately. The rest of the afternoon felt wrong after that. Too quiet, too aware. Jason barely spoke, and by evening, I could feel tension building beneath every normal conversation. His mother noticed it too. I could see it in the way she kept adjusting the bracelet on her wrist whenever the silence stretched too long. Finally, after dinner, Jason looked directly at me. You mind staying for a minute? The calmness in his voice somehow made it worse. His mother's eyes flickered toward mine instantly. Worried, I nodded slowly anyway. A few minutes later, the three of us sat around the dining table while the house settled into an uncomfortable silence. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms folded loosely. I'm just going to ask directly, he said finally. Am I imagining something between you two? Nobody answered immediately. The clock ticking in the kitchen suddenly sounded unbearably loud. I glanced toward her. She looked terrified, not angry, not defensive, terrified. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized how much she stood to lose if this went badly. Jason noticed her silence too. His expression shifted slightly. Wait, seriously. She lowered her eyes instantly. I never meant for this to happen, she said softly. Hearing the hurt in her voice made something tighten painfully in my chest. Jason looked between us in disbelief. How long? Not long, I answered honestly. And nothing happened for a while. We tried ignoring it. That's not really helping. I know. The frustration in his voice was real, but underneath it I could hear confusion more than anger. He looked at his mother again. Mom, her composure finally cracked a little then. I know how this sounds, she whispered. And if you're upset with me, I understand. Under the table, her hand trembled slightly near her lap. Without thinking, I reached down and gently held it. The movement was instinctive, protective. Jason noticed immediately, but instead of getting angrier, his expression changed into something more conflicted. Because for the first time, he wasn't seeing some reckless secret. He was seeing two people who genuinely cared about each other. I've never seen you like this before, he said quietly to her. She blinked, confused. Like what? Happy. The room went completely silent. Her eyes watered instantly, though she looked away quickly. Jason rubbed both hands over his face before exhaling hard. This is weird for me, he admitted. Like really weird. I know, I said quietly. But you're not messing around with her. The question hit harder than I expected. I shook my head immediately. No, never. Jason studied me carefully for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether he believed me. Then finally, he leaned back again with another long sigh. I don't get it, he muttered honestly. But he glanced toward his mother briefly. I also haven't seen you smile this much in years. Her lips parted slightly, like she didn't know what to say. None of us did. The tension didn't disappear after that conversation. But something shifted. Not perfect acceptance. Not immediate approval. Just understanding. And sometimes, understanding is enough for people to start finding their way forward. By the time autumn arrived, the relationship no longer felt fragile. It felt lived in, comfortable, real in the quiet ways that mattered most. The secrecy had faded slowly over the months after Jason found out. There were awkward moments in the beginning, of course. A few tense dinners. A few careful conversations where nobody quite knew what was appropriate anymore. But time softened things. Jason eventually stopped watching us so cautiously. The shock wore off once he realized nothing about the relationship was reckless or temporary. If anything, we became steadier as the months passed. And she changed too. Not dramatically, just lighter. I noticed it in the little things first. The way she laughed more easily now, tilting her head back instead of covering her smile with her hand. The way music returned to the house again while she cooked. The way she started wearing brighter colors instead of soft grays and dark sweaters all the time. One chilly evening, I arrive at the house to find her standing barefoot in the kitchen, quietly humming to herself while stirring something on the stove. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the room warmly. She looked over her shoulder the moment she heard me walk in. And that smile still got me every time. You're late, she teased softly. Traffic. She pretended to consider it. I'll allow it. I laughed quietly while setting my keys down. Without thinking about it anymore, she walked over and slipped her hand naturally into mine as she passed. The gesture was small, automatic now, but I still felt that familiar warmth every single time her fingers threaded through mine. Domestic, comforting, dangerously easy to get used to. How was work? She asked. Long. Her expression softened immediately. She lifted her free hand and brushed her fingertips lightly along my jaw before smoothing a strand of hair away from my forehead. The touch was gentle, almost absent-minded, but my body still reacted instantly to the tenderness behind it. You look exhausted, she murmured. I'm better now. Her eyes lingered on mine for a second before she smiled again, quieter this time. Later that evening, rain began falling outside again, soft against the windows like it had the night everything first changed between us. We sat together on the back porch wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm settle over the neighborhood. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine trees. Her head rested comfortably against my shoulder while my hand traced slow circles against the back of hers beneath the blanket. Somewhere inside the house, music played faintly through the speakers Jason had installed months ago. Everything felt peaceful. Not forbidden, not secret, just peaceful. I used to hate rainy nights, she admitted quietly after a while. I looked down at her. Why? They felt lonely. The honesty in her voice still affected me every time. She shifted slightly closer, her fingers curling more tightly around my hand. I spent so many years feeling invisible, she whispered. Not unhappy exactly. Just, she searched for the word. Forgotten. I turned toward her carefully. You're not invisible. Her eyes lifted to mine, slowly, soft with emotion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. The tension that once existed between us had transformed into something deeper now, something calmer and far more dangerous because it carried permanence. She smiled against my shoulder afterward, small and content. I still don't understand how this happened, she said quietly. I laughed under my breath. Me neither, but I'm glad it did. The rain continued falling softly around us while I held her a little closer beneath the blanket. And listening to her quiet breathing beside me, feeling the warmth of her hand resting in mine, I realized something simple and undeniable. Some people enter your life unexpectedly and somehow end up feeling like home.